will rock the world. And I can't wait to see you all come live on camera. I love to see what you're doing. So I want to thank Brightside. Thank all of you for having me. I had such a wonderful time. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. That's so awesome. Give her a big hand, everybody. I thought that was great. So now you know how to look your best on Zoom. And because we're running so late, I want to bring Dr. John on. Dr. John, are you there? Dr. John, let's see if I can find him.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
wow, we have so many people today. It's amazing. Dr.
Can you,
John is right here. Okay, let me spotlight him for everybody. So, Dr. John has really inspired us with his books. How many of you have his books now? Eat, Chew, and Live. So, we sent everybody in the club a book for Christmas. And so, thank you, Dr. John, for being our sponsor. And thank you for the books that are so, so valuable. So, Dr. John, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, but he is author of 4 books, and he's making a very big claim that you can actually reverse diabetes in 8 weeks. So, I'm going to let him tell you all about it. And I don't want you to be embarrassed, so I'm not going to ask how many diabetics are in the room. But I know that if you don't have diabetes, you know somebody that has diabetes, and it's something that's affecting every one of us. So, Dr. John, we're so grateful to have you, and please tell us about this amazing revolution that you're going to introduce us to.
first of all, Claire, thank you for having me, and I thank all the people who are watching or listening. The topic of today for me is women and diabetes, this being a Women's Month. So, one of the caregivers or most important caregiver in any family is the mother or the woman in the family, whether the direct patients or caregivers. And diabetes is a major problem. So I would like straight to go into the topic, if that is okay with you. I have some slides I would like to present, and then I can answer questions. Will that be okay, Elizabeth?
Can everybody turn their sound off? You have to go to your icon to mute, and can you mute yourself so that we can hear Dr. John? Thank you. Yes. Can you share your slide?
Shall I go straight to the slides? I cannot hear you, Elizabeth.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, you can go straight to your slides.
Okay. Are you sharing the screen with me?
Yes.
Can you see the slide?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to go to the presentation mode. So I'm going to. Okay. So let us start with what is diabetes. Diabetes is diagnosed when your blood glucose level is elevated. That's the only test you have, nothing else. There are 2 types of diabetes. Type 1, where insulin is absent. Type 2, where insulin is present. What is the significance of this? For that, you need to know, what does insulin do? Insulin is a molecule that's a messenger. It informs the cell of the presence of glucose outside. In other words, every cell can use glucose to produce energy. But when glucose molecules are outside, there is no mechanism for it to inform. For example, when somebody rings the doorbell in your home or apartment, you know there is somebody outside. If the bell does not work, you don't know. Even then, you have to go and open the door to let the person in. Here, the glucose has no receptor or for to ring, but that is the job of insulin. Insulin does not get inside a cell. It rings the doorbell, then the cell has to move in, send in a glucose transporter to the outside, load up the glucose molecules and bring them in. Then only the cell can use it. Now you can imagine in type 1 diabetes, if insulin is absent because their pancreas, these are usually in children, their pancreas has been damaged and no insulin, glucose molecules, there are plenty of glucose outside, but the cell is starving. And these children used to die by age 10 until about 100 years ago, 1920, insulin was discovered by two doctors in Canada. When that was administered, the children's quality of life improved, their lifespan became normal. When adults came with high blood glucose level, now, by the way, when insulin was given to the children with type 1 diabetes, their blood glucose level went down and became normal. When adults came up with high blood glucose level, the endocrinologists thought, well, it is the same as in children. In fact, it was called an adult onset diabetes. And they gave them insulin. Sure enough, their blood glucose level went down. So everybody thought this is the same disease occurring only in later age. Then when a test became available to measure insulin, they found out in adults, the level of insulin at the time of diagnosis of type 2 diabetes was normal or sometimes even above normal. That created a problem. So they looked at the structure of insulin molecule, that was normal. They looked at the function of insulin molecule, that was normal. For example, they took insulin from a diabetic, injected into a non-diabetic, and it worked. So the question is, why is the blood glucose level still high? So they had to come up with a hypothesis. 80 years ago, a doctor in Vienna suggested perhaps the problem is the cell. The cell is not responding. So they came up with a hypothesis. But before that, let me just clarify one point here. Insulin is released in the body naturally, not in a stream, but in pulses. So the question is why? Because insulin has multiple actions, not only messaging about glucose, but also it acts multiple genes and metabolic functions. I'll come to that later. Insulin release is sometimes independent of any glucose level or the independent or no, glucose uptake is independent of insulin. For example, brain needs glucose all the time. It cannot wait for insulin to be there. Then activity dependent. When muscles are working, they need glucose, whether insulin is there or not. Most of the time, keep in mind, we work out not when insulin level is high, but on low. And then there is insulin dependent movement of glucose. Okay, now let's go back to our diabetes. The incidence of type 2 diabetes is increasing. In the United States, 1 in 4 adults over 65 are diabetic, and 1 in 11 adults in the US are diabetic. In the world, 10% of the global population has type 2 diabetes. The problem is this: if you want to save Medicare from bankruptcy, the only thing you have to do is to control type 2 diabetes, because that costs an enormous amount of money that we are spending. In my opinion, we are wasting. Let me tell you why. In order to prevent any disease, we need to know the cause. So what is the cause of type 2 diabetes? This is the accepted theory called insulin resistance. If you go to the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases website, you will see this. Type 2 diabetes usually begins when muscle, liver, and fat cells, keep in mind, just 3 cells, muscle, liver, and fat cells, do not respond to insulin. The insulin is there, ringing the doorbell, but they are not responding. This is the claim. The problem is, so these are the 3 cells, muscles, liver and fat cell. The problem is this theory has never been validated. In every science, before a hypothesis is accepted as fact, it has to go through a three-step validation process. First, it's logic. Human body has 200 different types of cell, but the theory claims only 3, liver, muscle, and fat cells don't respond to insulin. So who picked these 3? And why insulin? There are so many hormones in the body. Why did they pick insulin? It's as if they formed a union one day and said, from tomorrow, we are not going to listen to insulin. Why? What's the reason for it? And even then, only the function of insulin related to glucose transport, nothing else. Now, what is the mechanism? In any hypothesis, you have to say, for example, is the doorbell not working? Or is the signal not going to the gene in charge? Or is the glucose transporter module not moving? And more importantly, is it the same mechanism, failure in all 3 sites? Nobody knows. Now, measurement. You need to be able to measure the degree of insulin resistance. There is no test. There is no test for whole body or at a site. If you give somebody insulin, blood glucose level goes down. Where does that sugar go? Does it go into the cell that is resistant, or does it go elsewhere? How do we know without a test? Whether you are newly diagnosed, whether you had complications, whether you had type 2 diabetes for 20 years, does it make any difference whether the insulin resistance is getting worse or not? Without a test, how can we know? So I'm putting out a completely new hypothesis. Type 2 diabetes is a lifestyle condition caused by diet, not a hormonal disease. Again, I believe type 2 diabetes is a lifestyle condition, more similar to high cholesterol, which is not caused as an independent disease. There is no American Cholesterol Association. There is no World Cholesterol Federation. There is no regional cholesterol associations. So why for glucose? And the problem is grains. Why? Because all grains are made of complex carbohydrate molecules. When they are digested, they release thousands and thousands of molecules of glucose. The glucose is what your cells burn, but excess glucose is converted in the liver into fatty acids. After a meal, within 4 hours, your blood glucose level will go up if you have a carbohydrate in your meal. But within the next 4 hours, all the cells pick up glucose because insulin informs them. And the leftover will come back to the liver. The liver will process it for storage. And when your fat stores are full, then muscles will start burning the fatty acid instead of glucose, and that leaves glucose in the blood. In other words, when you have a family history of diabetes, what you are inheriting is not a diabetic gene, but the storage capacity. How much fat can you store? If you fill up that fat storage capacity, then glucose stays in the blood as glucose. The liver does not convert it into fat because there is no place to store it. Now, how is this helpful? The same theory applies to everybody who is a diabetic, whether you are obese or lean or pregnant. For example, today's topic is diabetes in women. Let's take pregnancy or gestational diabetes. Somebody with no family history of diabetes, no previous history of diabetes, at the end of second trimester, diagnosed as gestationally diabetic with high blood glucose level. Why? So imagine if that lady, if the young girl has inherited 15 to 20 pound fat storage capacity because her family, everybody is lean. And then when she becomes pregnant, everybody is encouraging her to eat. This food is good for the complexion of the baby. This food will make her baby taller. This is more intelligent for brain. She eats and fills up her fat storage capacity. The glucose stays in the blood. She's diagnosed as a gestational diabetic. And after delivery, when she loses weight, her fat stores are emptied, her diabetes goes away. Keep in mind, these people, when they get older, middle age and later, if they gain the same amount of weight, they are more likely to develop type 2 diabetes at an earlier age compared to other people. Why? Because of weight gain. So whether they are pregnant or not is immaterial. It is the weight gain that causes the type 2 diabetes. So what's the mechanism? When fat stores are full, the fat stays in the blood, muscles start using fatty acids for energy, that leaves glucose in the blood. In other words, our muscles are like a hybrid engine. It can use gasoline or electricity. Similarly, muscles can use glucose or fatty acid to produce energy. If it is using fatty acid, glucose stays in the blood. Simple as that. And you can measure anybody who is type 2 diabetic. If you go back and look at the blood test, the triglyceride level will be higher for months or years before the blood glucose level goes up. Why? That is telling you that your fat stores are getting full. So if you eat a lot of grains and if you have a lot of glucose absorbed into the body, what will happen? The liver can hold 120 grams of glucose as glycogen to be released back into the blood when your blood glucose level goes down. Because keep in mind, your brain needs glucose all the time. Otherwise, hypoglycemia, you get confused. All the brain functions can be affected. There are three possible outlets for excess glucose for the body to deal with. One is it is used as a fuel. Now, muscles can, as I mentioned, can work on fatty acid, and so it can leave glucose in the blood. But also, it fuels any other activity. For example, everybody knows that the coronavirus pandemic, people who have type 2 diabetes have more severe problems. Keep in mind, they are not more prone to get or catch the virus, but if they catch it, they have more severe complications. Why? Because if they have glucose available, the cell will produce more copies of the virus. In addition, when blood glucose level goes up, insulin is released. Insulin promotes all activities of the cell, yes, including virus production or cancer growth. So if you provide the cell with the fuel, there's glucose, and a promoter, which is insulin, then there is no wonder they have more virus multiplication, and the same goes for cancer growth. This could be the reason why the body is not releasing insulin naturally on a stream. It is pulses, because it can modify using another hormone called glucagon to suppress the insulin, the effect. I'm sorry to say, I don't agree with the long-acting insulins or medications that cause release of insulin on a constant basis, because I'm afraid that that can lead to complications. Now, the problem here is many people depend on exercise to reduce blood glucose level. But as we get older, we lose hormones, we lose muscle mass. It takes longer to do the same job at age 50 or 60 compared to what you could do at age 20 and 25. So you cannot depend on exercise to burn your glucose. Yes, you do need exercise to condition your heart, condition your lungs, condition your muscles, but not for weight control or glucose control. Now, the fat, I've already, the second possibility is that it can be converted into fat, into acetylcholine I made, and fat, and to be stored. And the third outlet for glucose is cholesterol. Keep in mind, cholesterol is an animal product, but vegetarians also need cholesterol. The primary use of cholesterol is as an insulator, because if you don't have cholesterol in your skin, you will lose heat. When you go to a cold environment, you will lose water if you go to a hot environment. So cholesterol is the one that protects us as an insulator, even though it is also used for hormones and other production, other metabolic activities. Now, what I'm suggesting is that it is the fat storage capacity getting filled up. What is the evidence? People on HIV antiretroviral therapy, they have a side effect of elevation of blood glucose level even when they are young people. Why? Because one of the side effects of the antiretroviral medication is it reduces the number of fat cells coming online. So their fat storage capacity is reduced, it gets filled up, glucose stays in the blood. There is a medication called thiazolidine. They used to treat type 2 diabetics. And one of the ways it does that is it prevents the fat cells to come online. That means their fat cell, well, that it reverses the other way around. It prompts the fat cells to come online, so there's more fat storage capacity. The glucose is converted into fat and stored, so their blood glucose level goes down. Now, there's clinical evidence from when Native Americans were brought to the reservations. They had an extensive blood work and found that type 2 diabetes was very rare. But in 2012, CDC announced their incidence is double that of white people. Why? When Native Americans were living, they moved from one food source to another. They never stayed in one place to cultivate grains. Whereas what they were given, the majority of dietary energy intake came from grain-based foods. In 1984, a researcher in Australia asked 10 Aborigines with type 2 diabetes whether they can go back to the bush and live like their ancestors within 8 weeks. And that is where I got the title from, 8 Steps to Reverse Type 2 Diabetes in 8 weeks. In 8 weeks, these Aborigines lost weight. They were able to stop their diabetic medications. Why? Because again, they moved from one food source to another without any cultivated grains. The percentage of energy coming from daily food, from carbohydrate in the Aboriginal lifestyle was less than 35%. In urban lifestyle, it is 50% or more. That is the problem. Now, so why do I say avoid grains? Because in my opinion, nature never intended grain for humans. Otherwise, we would have had beaks and the ability to digest the chaff. We don't. That doesn't mean you cannot have it, but we are eating way too much. So the first thing you have to do if you are concerned about your weight or diabetes, cut down the amount of grain-based foods, energy to 1/2 of what you are consuming now. You can enjoy everything else and eat everything, whatever you want, except cut back on the grains. Okay, let me give you a couple of helpful tips. One, you have to take charge of your own body. Don't give it to a medication, don't give it to a doctor. If you want to control your blood sugar, if you don't put something that will release glucose in your mouth, in your body, if you don't put that food in your mouth, how can your blood glucose level go up? Just think about that. It is what you put in your mouth that is reflected on your blood sugar. Second, just like I said, reduce glucose entry. If you don't put it in your mouth, you cannot have it you won't get it in your blood. Yes, you do need exercise, but not for blood sugar control, but for conditioning, as I said earlier. So with this, I will stop. Any questions?
Okay. Plenty. Dr. John, you've been so fruitful with your information, and information that you share with us is quite vital. But you mentioned that, in terms of our workout regimes or exercise regimes, you're saying that typically that may not be sufficient enough to counterbalance the surplus of glucose to reduce fat, for the most part. Is there a time that you could reach that kind of balance in your exercise or activity?
Well, keep in mind, 1 pound of fat stored in the body has got 3,500 calories. 3,500. When you go for exercise, how many calories do you spend? If you work out an hour and a half, at the most 200 to 300 calories. Okay, how long will it take to expend 3,500 calories? And in the meantime, you are still eating. So
Right.
exercise should not be used to control weight or control your blood glucose level. The better thing is not to put it in your mouth. Again, you need exercise regardless of your weight, regardless of your blood glucose level status, to condition your heart, to condition your lungs, to condition your muscles. What does that mean? A conditioned heart can use less pumping to put out more blood. A conditioned lung can tolerate a viral infection in the lung better than somebody whose lungs are not conditioned. A conditioned, a person with a conditioned muscles can outrun when there is danger. So these are the functions of protection that nature has given us. So we need exercise, but not for blood glucose control. That's not going to work in the long term. In a young people, yes, it may work. If you do resistance exercise, I'm not suggesting not to do any exercise, but what is the objective of exercise?
Good, good, good.
To that
Go
real
ahead.
quick?
Go ahead. Yeah, go please.
Yeah, I was just going to agree with that too. And I was kind of getting along the lines of what Dr. John was saying as well. There's a lot of research to suggest that exercise is more beneficial for weight maintenance than it is necessarily for weight loss. So we see a lot more dietary interventions being great for the weight loss because it's teaching those habits. It's teaching us what evolutionarily the foods that we should have been consuming, and then taking exercise in the sense of maintaining our weight with foraging or hunting, right? We used to hunt or forage, so we walk, or we do hunting, high intensity training to train our heart and our lungs and things. So I think that that was kind of what he was trying to say, and I thought that that would help too.
Yes, Elisa, thank you.
I loved your talk as well.
One more comment. Help us to understand, if you will, the process of 8 weeks, and by reducing your grain intake of 30%, will reverse the process or the diagnosis of diabetes, and the wage and the stages that can happen, as you put it, where your body now starts to burn the glucose that you've accumulated, and the fatty cells. I was listening to that, and it was quite remarkable how you explained it. If you could walk that through a little bit more specifically.
Let me clarify that, because
Okay.
it can be different from in each individual. Now, everybody has heard of the test A1C.
Right.
What is that? Hemoglobin A1C. Blood glucose, glucose molecules can get attached to a number of different proteins in the body. Hemoglobin is one of them. And the percentage of hemoglobin molecule with glucose molecules attached is what is called A1C. The beauty of that test is the hemoglobin is destroyed. The hemoglobin is inside the red blood cell. The lifespan of the red blood cell is 3 months. They are taken out of circulation. They are reprogrammed, reproduced. So if you take A1C, that's an average of blood glucose level for 3 months. Okay, that is good for keeping an eye on how well your blood glucose level is under control. But the glucose is also attached to other proteins in the body, albumin, for example. So if there are what we don't measure, when the blood glucose level goes down, these glucose molecules can come back into the blood from attachment of other proteins. So it may take time to get the blood glucose level down. In some people, it may take more than 8 weeks. But if your blood glucose level is moderate, then you can expect at least a movement towards lower within 8 weeks. It may not be exactly under to the normal limit, but under the diagnosis criteria or threshold for type 2 diabetes. That is what I'm suggesting. Is somebody asking a question? I cannot hear.
We're going to move to the round table. If you have a question for Dr. John, please put it in the chat and we will read the questions. And if we have time, we'll bring you on. So I'm going to let Elton come here and be on the brown table. I'd like to introduce you to the panel. Renee, can you get on? Can you hear me, everybody?
Yes,
Renee?
I can hear you.
I'm on.
Okay, can you turn your video on so I can put you on the spotlight?
I believe it is on.
Oh, good. I see it now. Okay. I love that book, Head Trash. And Anthony Valero. So I'd like to, Doreen has to leave early because she has a client meeting. So we're going to start with her. I'm going to let each of you introduce yourselves. And we have two amazing authors on this line, three actually. Dr. John has done 4 books, but Anthony's book is pretty surprisingly good, and Renee, Head Trash. So I'm going to let Elton come here. And Doreen, can you start?
I can. Good morning, everyone. It's
Morning.
good morning. It's nice to see all of you. When Elizabeth contacted me, we were talking about caregivers. And one of the things that I thought I would do in the short amount of time I have is to talk with you about caregiver stress. Because no matter whether it's a rare disease or other form of medical issue, stress is a major problem for caregivers. And many times they don't seem to identify it or don't know what to do to try to control it. So I'm going to go to a PowerPoint, Elizabeth, for information. There we go. And I just want to take a few minutes to talk about what stress does to the human body. And Dr. John probably has a lot more information on this, but if you just quickly take a look at this list, this is a very extensive list of the kinds of things that can happen to the body as a result of the stress that people are feeling. And you can look down through both of those columns and see the things that are there that you maybe have experienced yourself over the years, or perhaps if there's someone in your family who's really dealing with stress related to whether it's job, but today we're talking about caregivers, and these are the kinds of things that they do experience. Some of these things will happen for short periods of time. Others are much longer in their existence for the person, and whether or not they feel they have the skills to manage the stress that they're dealing with. So part of the question is for caregivers is, as a caregiver, how and where do you distress? And as you can see the picture here, this is where I go if I'm able to do it. Living in Pittsburgh right now, that's kind of a problem. But I love the ocean and I love the beach. And this is where, if I had my choice, I would be when I need to distress. When you look at this slide, if you look at the center of it, it identifies stress and a lot of different words there that are related to stress. But part of what caregivers have to do is to learn to take that stress and take it away from them out to other people to help them, other situations, other community groups to give them assistance so that that stress can be decreased on them. I'm a Alzheimer's and dementia practitioner, so the families that I deal with are dealing with stress from the time they are suspicious that there's a diagnosis of something happening, all the way through the disease process to the end stage and death. And stress is just an ongoing cumulative kind of thing that takes place with caregivers. It's almost never ending, and people have great difficulty in trying to figure out how to manage it with all the other responsibilities they have. So I want to talk just a few minutes about stress relievers and what people can do. And this is true for no matter what medical condition you might be dealing with or what work situation. family situation you might be in. Number one is to learn to walk away. We do know with dementia patients, we can't argue with them because we can never win. Their reality is their reality. And the sooner that caregivers can learn to walk away from their situation, the easier it's going to be to manage the situation. Counting to 10 before you speak, so you're not reacting, but you're responding to whatever the situation might be. You know, attitude and perspective are such an important part of the human makeup. One person can be dealing with cancer and be so overwhelmed with it that they are so negative, where the person in the next bed has decided they're not going to let cancer control their life, and they're going to do the best they can, and they're going to move on. So we do know that attitude and perspective are so important. The other thing for caregivers, which is really difficult because they're so consumed with what they're doing, is to try to find 5 to 10 minutes a day, at least, maybe once a day, maybe twice a day, when they can find a space and a time for just some quiet time. Perhaps it's when the patient is sleeping. The patient might be watching TV, maybe sleeping late in the morning, going to bed early at night, but just to take a few minutes for yourself to breathe, as we were listening to the program the last time around, of how to breathe and to relax your body. But it can be done anywhere. It doesn't have to be a particular space. I encourage family caregivers to practice breathing and that quiet time in the car when they're waiting for a traffic light, just as a simple example. Asking doctors for something to help them with sleep can be very helpful, because we know it's really important for the brain and for how the person responds to have 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night. It allows the brain to cleanse itself and to do the kinds of things that it needs in order for people to function appropriately. And joining a support group, I cannot encourage people enough to do that. In support groups, you find people who are going through similar things, perhaps not the exact same thing, but certainly similar things. Before I moved here in Rhode Island, I was facilitating 11 support groups, and I can tell you the importance of them to people who are struggling with issues around how to manage themselves as caregivers as well as their care receivers. Meditation, yoga, spiritual prayer, all of these things can be helpful to someone to help reduce stress. It's again taking that time to just step away and take care of yourself, because we know that caregivers don't take care of themselves like they should because they're so consumed in caring for others. The relaxation breathing, we've seen presentations on that before, and it is so helpful. The other thing that I would say, and I find this over and over and over again in the 25 years I've been working in this field, caregivers are reluctant to ask for help and reluctant to accept help when it's offered. And those are two things that caregivers need to learn to do going forward with their management of care, because caregiving is not something that can be done by one person. It takes a team. And we have the phrase that it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a team to assist a caregiver and the patient going through some of these difficult diseases. Respite time.
Doreen, if I could, well, I want to move us to the round table. So if I can give you like a minute to kind of close out or something like that. Is that okay? Okay, thank you. Go ahead, finish. Doreen?
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I thought you.
I wanted you to take about another minute to wrap up if I could, so I can move to the round table.
Okay. As you can see by just the listing that I've given you, that there are so many stressors out there that cause have a severe impact on caregivers. And the kind of steps that I've suggested today are things that caregivers can do to release that stress in order to get through in many cases, not just short-term illnesses, but years and years, especially in the dementia world, of care for their loved ones. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to seem abrupt with that, but I'm trying to get us to a roundtable so that we can talk kind of comprehensively about some of the elements that each representative is sharing with us. And we have a pretty esteemed panel here, and they have some great value to add with where we are as a patient healthcare environment. And what I want to kind of discuss is that, as the topic of our profile today is, capturing your power and reassessing your power. Dr. John put it this way: you have the power in terms of what you eat, what you put into your body. We have to find a way to assimilate that power, and also healthcare, as it were. A value added about what powers you have, because when we're giving a diagnosis, now the blame, responsibility, the credit, all that we have to deal with according to that, it can be a power devastating condition. But how do we capture power now so that we at least have the courage, the confidence, and the ambition to face what we're looking at? And one of our esteemed panels members, Miss Renee Cavallaro, she's written a book called Head Trash. And tell us about yourself just in a minute or so, and because we'll come back to the roundtable scenario. So, if you will, Mr. Cavallaro. Put your mute. Remove your mute. Remove your mute.
Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, wherever you are. And it's nice to see you all. And my name is Rini Cavallari, and I am the CEO and founder of a company called Powered by Aspire. And we, along with our sister company, the RCI Institute, we work with leaders all around the world. And when I look at leadership is a behavior, not a position. And we study them and help organizations and the people in them really be in the mindset that serves them to be at their best. So we work with people who are housekeepers in hotels all the way up through Cs around the globe. And this Head Trash, the Leading Killer of Human Potential, is my 6th book.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that. And also we have, as a speaker and presenter, Mr. Anthony Vallari. Is that correct? I'm telling you.
It's
okay. Very good.
It's Valerio.
Okay, Valerio.
It's
okay.
fine. It's close enough. Well, anyway. Hello everyone, and greeting to everyone. And thank you to Elizabeth for inviting me here. I'm a writer, author of 12 books, and a few years ago, I wrote a book called Semmelweis. Semmelweis was a doctor, and I could talk about that a little bit. And just to say, I wrote the book before the pandemic. His pandemic was childbed fever in the mid-19th century, where women were dying up to 30% in childbirth. So I wrote the book about this doctor, how he came to investigate the process about how he found the causes and means of prevention of childbed fever in the mid-19th century and was really not listened to. So that's what my presentation will be about.
Very good, very good, very good. Thank you for that. And also on our panel is an esteemed writer, children's book writer, and she hails from New Jersey, I think, and moving in between. But Mrs. Kim, you're on with us?
Okay.
Yes, speak. Yeah.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
Okay. Hi, I have since moved to Tennessee, but I appreciate being here. Thank you.
Very good, very good, very good. And of course, Dr. John and myself. And we'd like for you to belay, I think that's everybody. We'd like to belay your questions to the end. I think you'll be excited about the outcome. And so while we're here in this time, and Dr. John, of course, you've heard him just now. But what we'd like to do at this juncture is, because we find ourselves at the helm of some very important data, detail, facts, agenda, and aspirations. I mean, we find ourselves in a healthcare environment where our health is being challenged from all different aspects. And, you know, there are people out there that don't want you to be healthy. They don't want you to control your own aspiration for health. Or maybe, I mean, the hand of health is in doctors, hospitals, physicians, the corporation, as it were. But, you know, I think we need to realize that you have a say in all of this. You have a say in how you'll be treated, because when the doctor gives you a prognosis, he stands with you and he waits for you to respond. Well, what direction do you want to go? And then it falls into your lap in terms of what your options are. So now this is not a kind of, you know, tell you what to do kind of thing, but, you know, we have to now step into a place of responsibility. We have to step into a place of what can I do? What are my options? You know, and of course we like to yield in the prospect of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. But I mean, you know, I mean, there's this big wave, even when it comes to the COVID, a big wave is coming toward us. It's coming toward us. You know, now, you know, in order to reestablish some balance, because the wave itself, just the knowledge, just the hearing, could really throw you off balance. It could countermand things for you. But we'd like to, you know, have you understand that there are options, and many times you go into research mode and you respond. But no, so I'd like to pose to my audience or the roundtable: is there a best case scenario? I mean, of course, we follow certain practices. We exercise, try to eat right, take the right supplements, go visit your doctor, hear and follow his direction and advice. You know, so I mean, when it comes to our say-so, when it comes to what can typical patients follow as a regime to you know to interact with you know, I mean, no, moreover, how can we start to develop our say-so? How can we start to stand up? How can we start to engage an active dialogue? I mean, because you know when you don't feel well, you know when you feel well, and you want more of those days. So, I mean, and every day it's on us. So, I mean, I hope this is thought-provoking. You know, what kind of stand is the typical stand for us to determine this is where I want to be? I hope that's appropriate. Who wants to go first?
I'll go.
Okay, please.
So I think what you're asking is really what can we control in
Right,
the
right.
really difficult environments that caregivers face. And I am a mama of a 20-year-old, and of course have nieces and nephews, etc. And if I've learned anything in that process, I learn it over and over again, almost every day, is that I feel the way I think. And what's going on in that brain of ours, and in particular at this time in our world where we have this pandemic, there's, you know, that hopefully is coming to a close while we figure out how to prevent future ones. But at the same time, we have an epidemic of head trash, and that our brains are full of noise, and not noise that's helpful. And so it's critical for us to understand that we need to build muscle, both proactively so we can draw on it, no different than when you're exercising, because you're exercising really for proactive reasons around your health or strength, or to be able to call on your health when you need it to fight. And the same is true with that emotional brain, is that we have to proactively build muscle against the things that slow us down, because our thoughts are running the show. That's really it. Our thoughts are running the show.
I appreciate your comments there, because I met Bella in your book, and you should check up her book, Head Trash, where, you know, we've got all this negative stuff coming at us, and you've got to find a way to fuse it out first. You know, one, there's fear. Right away, you know, any kind of dilemma, fear, terror. So, anybody else, please?
Yeah, I'd like to chime in. Hi, it's Anthony. it's very thought-provoking of what you're saying. And in the case that I studied, childbed fever and Semmelweis, these were women who just gave birth, and then they were victims of infection, and they were being handled by men who were not cleaning their hands properly. So the lesson would be, I guess, not I guess, I mean, the science is, just know who's touching you, because there were men who were coming from autopsy down to the lying in clinics without washing their hands and then examining and delivering babies. And these women died within 1 or 2 days of an infection that my physicians told me that anything I could write about that to describe that kind of death wouldn't be sufficient to describe what women went through. So I think it's about, and that thing, I mean, I could say it's about protection and knowing who's touching you and handling you. And I guess it would translate today into, preventing infection, because at that time, it was before the compound microscope and before Pasteur, so that Semmelweis and his colleagues didn't know how germs were delivered and shared. So that
you make a great comment there. I mean, you're standing there talking to the physician, and you're not wearing gloves, and you say, "Did you wash your hands? Did you?" You assume that they've washed their hands,
right,
and they're practicing certain protocols.
That's right.
So so what I'm saying is that, okay, how do you challenge people that way? I mean, I've had conversations with doctors, and and I ask them specific. Because when your health is in question, those conversations are important to you. You need to know, well, what are the protocols? What are my options? And Dr. John, I want to hear what you have to say about that, especially when it comes to health and that stance that way.
Well, the topic I was asked to talk, or I thought our talk is about how to take care of the family.
Yeah.
When your child is diagnosed with cancer.
Okay.
And there's nothing more devastating than to face the reality that you never anticipated. When you see a smile on the face of a child, it brightens your day. But after such a diagnosis, that smile comes with a background of fear and anxiety that you can never erase. So then you start thinking, if I am this much stressed, what is going through the mind of the child who has very little knowledge about what cancer means and how that could impact his or her life? So your challenge is to be part of an affectionate family, giving comfort to the child and helping everyone navigate this difficult road ahead without adding to the stress level of each one. You have to plan how to make the child content while at the same time making the child fight to survive. You have to make differences in your daily routine or changes in your daily routine. You have to still make decisions based on authority and expectation, even when an ideal outcome may not be achievable. Yet that is the way it has to be. So let me give a few tips. Just like Doreen said, first of all, you have to take charge of your own. You have to be physically, mentally, and emotionally fit. Otherwise, you cannot take care of somebody else. You have to be taking care of yourself first. Do physical exercise to be mentally fit. Look into diabetes. In my opinion, most of the fear with the diagnosis of diabetes comes from not knowing what it means. And because I know this because I went through that. Within the last few months, I have been reclassified as a cancer survivor. So I went through that. I know how a person feels when you are told you have cancer. What's going to happen? No, what can I plan? What's going to happen to my family? All this go through, but imagine a child that you are a caregiver. You have to know how to console. So the best way to do that, learn more about cancer. Disease.
So,
Cancer is uncontrolled multiplication of cells. How does it happen? What can you do to slow it down? Let me give you just one simple tip. The maximum number of precancerous cells in our body is when we are in the mother's womb, in the fetal. 99% of them are destroyed by our own immune system before we are born. In other words, our immune system is quite capable of destroying cancer cells unless the cancer cells multiplies at a rate faster than the immune system can kill them. And that is the reason why the incidence of cancer is increasing. As I mentioned in my earlier slide on diabetes, when you have a high glucose level and high insulin, it promotes all cellular activities, including cancer cell multiplication. This is why people with type 2 diabetes have 50% higher incidence of pancreatic cancer, liver cancer, colon cancer, endometrial cancer, because their body has the fuel and the supporting mechanism to increase cancer cell growth. I'll stop that here and so others can participate.
okay. That's amazing. That's fascinating. You shared that. I mean, with typical people, typical patients probably aren't inspired. And your direct response was a research. You went into research mode. What are my options? And, but yet you didn't buckle under the fear. You didn't buckle under the fear. You decided that I'm not going to let this cripple me, but I now have to find alternatives and solutions. Great aspects. That's wonderful. Ms. Kim, what's your perspective on that? Bring you in to share with us. Ms. Kim, you're on mute. You got something to say?
Well, I find that fascinating about the cancer and then the fact that Dr. John speaks of diabetes, because the one thing that came to my mind was the culprit in the American diet, and that's sugar. Do you find that connection, Dr. John, between the overconsumption of raw sugars and cancer and diabetes coming together?
Well, I'm so glad you mentioned that word, because the fear of natural sugar comes from not from actual studies or evidence, but just from word association. Let me explain that. The blood glucose level is known as blood sugar, but it is not the natural sugar. It is glucose. Okay? Now, natural sugar is two molecules, glucose and dextrose, or fructose, glucose and fructose. And only half of that is glucose. The glucose is absorbed faster, and the fructose takes time, but it is absorbed. In the world right now, in our meals, the present day meals, the maximum contribution of glucose comes not from table sugar, but from grains. If you take a kernel of wheat or rice or corn, it contains thousands of molecules of complex carbohydrate. Each molecule of complex carbohydrate can have up to 200,000 molecules of glucose. So when you eat a handful or a tablespoonful of rice, you are literally eating glucose, which is converted into absorbed as blood sugar. So unless you drink a whole lot of soda with sugar, no, don't worry about table sugar, because if that is the case, when you are diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, all you have to do is to stop eating sugar and your diabetes should go away. I guarantee you it won't happen.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. John. Now, this is, this is an important aspect because and I'll preface it, our question this way. I had a cousin, a good cousin of mine. I was one of my favorite cousins, and he lived in Maryland, and he went to a doctor, and the doctor had suggested he get a knee replacement. Got the knee replacement. About 6 months later, the other knee bothered him, and he got another knee replacement. And then consequently, he had a shoulder replaced, an elbow replaced, and that kind of thing. So essentially, we called him the $6 million man because he got all of his joints and knees and things like that replaced. My point here is though that we're in the point where doctors, of course, how do we move our community and culture toward a place where doctors fix everything, and we're not on a revolving door or treadmill to go back to the doctor? How do we focus our time and attention? Now, the doctors are an important element of our culture and time, absolutely necessary. But of course, when doctors have us on a revolving treadmill of sorts, and they're getting prosperous. In the case of my cousin, his doctor must have made a fortune on him. But did he need all those operations? I don't know. But the point that I'm making here is our culture trying to move forward, the doctors really getting toward curing our conditions and elements, and not on a cycle to repeat and pay.
I'd like to respond, if I may. I'd like to respond to that as also a second $1 million man, and had about your cousin and orthopedics. I was very active, an athlete, and I still remain a golfer. And I saw the X-rays out of cartilage. So then I had one knee replacement and then 2 hip replacements. So the only joint I have left of mine is my right knee. It was causing, but on the other side it was causing a great deal of pain. Your cousin was in a lot of pain.
Yeah.
In the case, and then in retrospect, what I would do again, though, and I investigated any alternative, methods, and I'm a yoga practitioner, and writing really is essentially a meditative process. So I've been doing that a long time, and ever since then, I must say, I've worked my body exercise harder, and and work with the joint replacements because it's already done, And so your cousin, a great deal of empathy goes out from me to him. And I found a physical therapist, by the way, who was really wonderful, trained, born and bred in India and England and the United States. And I work with him. So rehab, as we grow older, is a lifetime process. It's a daily, So, I mean, I think that's what happened. I would also investigate before any kind of surgery of that kind, any other type of methods of improving the joint, joint fluidity, if you will.
Okay, very good. Anyone else? I posed that because I had the benefit of attending a conference once. It was in Singapore, and there was it was a medical devices conference, and the initiative was that what happens when you have to replace a particular device because the previous device was flawed, and you got to return it. I said, well, how do you return a knee? How do you take it back because it doesn't work, or something like that. But now, and I this is more or less a position of patient advocacy where we're in a position of control, and again, we're trying to move toward more patient controls, more patient say so, or more patient in an involvement or activity of speaking out, because our community or the healthcare community may not be in the position to deliver what we need delivered. And so it is our hope that our discussion would add value for that kind of thing. And even when it comes to such a case as diabetes, now there may be some scatter about our community and getting people to the point where, because I mean, I've seen more and more commercials now concerning insulin, where some of the prescriptions are backing away from insulin prescriptions. I don't know if you've seen that. I paid a little attention to that. That means that maybe there's some alternatives that we should have considered some time ago. So just open discussion and tell me what you're feeling and what you're thinking about those